Hey y'all, I'm James Wright, and I am always cutting myself on the sides of my chisels, so I think it's about time that we make a first aid kit. So let's have some fun with octagonal dovetails. And this project is going to start out where all good projects start out. A chunk of white oak. Yay, happiness. This is a little over 3/4 inches thick, and I want to make the bottom and the top out of this one same piece. So we're going to resaw this down. It's about 8 inches across, but as big as I can make this, that is the size the box is going to be, because the top is going to be, well, the width of whatever board I have here. So I'm going to strike a line right down the middle, and I find if I use a marking gauge from one side, then put it on the other side of the board, I have two parallel lines running right beside each other. It's a little easier to follow than one going across. I don't need to go all the way down because the box is only going to be about 8 inches by 8 inches, but I wanted to cut down a little bit more and have some slack on there. So I made it about 8 inches by 10 inches-ish. So once I cut down to depth, then we can cut off the excess, and hey, here are the boards. I'm going to take the top and bottom out. They're both a little over 3/8 of an inch, and that is perfectly fine. It's going to give me some excess on there. And yes, of course, make sure you use a good bench dog. So we're going to smooth this out and get it all ready. The other side is already plain smooth, but this is the side with the saw cuts. Just make sure you go with the grain. It's much easier. We're going to shoot up one end, make sure that is good and square, and then we're going to use that as the side we're going to measure everything else off of. So I want to make sure that is true, and I want to know what corner is true so I know which ones are what I want. Now I want this to be square, and therefore I can grab the other board and use it as the thickness or the length of the second board. And this way I know that the two boards are exactly the same. They don't have to be perfect because I'm going to be shaving them down in the future, but it's a quick way to just eye out where square is. Then I'm going to lay out, try and find where the center point is, and with that I can come in with a compass and draw marks that I know are going to then all be equidistant from the center. That allows me to draw the octagon on there. Now I need to figure out how big my sides are going to be, because everything is determined by the box. So I'm going to draw on there how much bigger the sides will be than the bottom or the top. And that lets me know how long the boards need to be. This is some well over 100-year-old white oak quarter sawn, really beautiful stuff, and I thought it would make really good use for this. It was beat up. It came out of a desk that was made around the turn of the last century. And yeah, it had been used as a potting bench, and it was in bad shape. So all the pieces basically broke apart on me, and now I've got a bunch of this really old quarter sawn white oak that is beautiful. So normally I would make it out of something a little thinner, but as this was the first time I did angled dovetails that were quite this exaggerated, I wanted to make it a little thicker. That just makes it a little bit easier to eyeball and draw lines. Though in the future, I would definitely want to make it a little bit thinner. So I'm just going to draw a line on one end at roughly 45 degrees, and then come back and plane it to exactly 45 degrees. I can check it with square. I want to make sure that it is perpendicular to the side, as well as 45 to the face. And a good miter square or unsquare will really help out here. Once I know that's on, we can mark out its length and then cut the other 45 on. This first one is just going to be the template because they all need to be the exact same size. So I just want to make sure this one is correct and is the right length, the right angle, and everything is on it. Now I want to cut a groove in the top for the lid and then a rabbet in the bottom so that the bottom is actually inset in. And originally I was going to do it all out of one board, but I'll explain that here in a minute. We just want to actually experiment with cutting that rabbet and groove. So that's my pattern, and I need 8 of these. I think for the rest of them I'm going to do the dovetails first and then run the grooves. Originally I was going to do them all out of the stick, but I want to make the 45s matching, so if I can't go all the way along, I'll be doing the inside of one and the outside of the other, so I have to do them all individually. And then I've got to make 8 sets of dovetails. This thing's going to be really tedious. That's what I like. Nick. Now that I have a pattern, I can use that to mark the rest, and I want them to all be the same length. You'll notice here I'm marking with a pencil. Anytime that the line really doesn't matter, I mark it with a pencil. And that just has my brain that says, stay away from the line. It gives me that leeway to cut back to it in the future. If I need an exact mark, I need to cut to a mark, then I use a marking knife. But in this case, the pencil allows me to know that, let's just make it generally this shape. And it's always a little bit longer than it needs to be. So we can lay out one and then flip it back and forth and back and forth. I would have liked to have just made them all out of a straight piece so I could have cut the groove at one time, but I just didn't have enough. On to the dovetails. Now, normally we would transfer the mark with a marking gauge, but in this case, it's just not going to work quite as well. So I'm going to use the practicality of the board to make a nick mark, and then I can come in with a square and play connect the dots. Anytime going across from face to face, I'm going to be using the miter gauge, the miter square, or the unsquare. Once I have all of the dovetail spots lined out, I'm going to angle the saw and start cutting into it. Now, if you really want to see a lot more detail in this, I think it was the third of 8 dovetails, I did a video on live, actually, where I went through the whole thing step by step by step. I was going to do a detailed regular video, but I have a couple of those making other angled dovetails when I was making a stool. So if you want to see that, it's the exact same process, just 45 degrees as opposed to, I think the last one was like 10 degrees off of 90. On some of these, I came in with the coping saw and removed the waste. And for these ones, that actually works out pretty well because you have that delicate end on the other side. But most of them I ended up just chopping out. I find that to be a little faster. One of the easiest ways to transfer the pins, the tails to the pins, is put a little stop block in so that you can slide it down in there and it locks down in the corner. And then you can draw your marks inside just like normal. And for these, it works out really, really well. If the board were longer, I might have a little more difficulty, and then I can do it in the vise, as I've shown in another video. And right around here, I didn't catch it, but I'm sawing on the wrong side of the line. Oops. Well, yeah, this is the first set of dovetails, and for some reason my brain just said, yay, we're going to cut on that side, and you realize that there's no X marks on here, nothing to say you should cut on this side or that side. So yeah, I really blew that one up big time. And you'll see it in the end. This one has a huge, huge gap on it. Now, I could have, because of the first time doing dovetails at this crazy angle, I could have actually gone and made a prototype ahead of time. But I really don't like doing that. Number one, it takes more time, and I'm lazy. But number two, and probably more important, is that I prefer to have a future information on my mistakes and what I learned and how I learned it. And having those gaps as part of these projects, specifically projects like this that are just shop projects. They're things I'm going to have around for a long time, but they're not show projects. They're not something I'm selling to someone else. These are just simple projects. Yeah, and here you can see that gap. Oops, oh well. So let's take a break after doing the first one, and let's actually move on to the top here. I wanted to have the red cross on there, the little help symbol. So I'm going to be putting on a carving pattern. I just pulled up a simple cross that I found online, and I'm going to use a V-tool to cut in the perimeter of it. And this is really quick and easy. If you've never used a V-tool to do carving, this is phenomenally easy. You can just follow a line. And I make sure that the line is just running along one side of the groove. Here you can see I'm just making sure that the line is always touching the one side of the groove. Then I'm going to come in with the bevel down on the chisel and pare out in between so that I get a recessed surface in here, because I'm going to fill this with red epoxy. Now, normally I would use a nicer epoxy, but in this case I'm going to use a quick 30-minute that I have. It mixes up pretty well, and I have some other dyes to mix in. I thought this first one would be a little bit too pink, so let's add in a little black, but no black came out. Let's add a little more black, and then, oops, oh, too much. So I mixed this together, but it ended up coming out very, very purple. And it wasn't quite the color I wanted. So I mixed up another one with just the pink, and it actually ended up being okay. It was a little bit brighter pink, and the video is going to make it look really pink, but in reality, it's a sedate red. So we're going to set that aside to cure, and in the meanwhile, I'm going to do all of the dovetails. Yay! You have to love the magic of the cooking show. So we got these blocks from before, and they work a lot better if you don't have the dovetails in between, especially in this case where I'm connecting onto 2 little pins. But they work okay. They are better than just putting it in the vise or just going between the dogs. and they are better than going on double-sided tape, which I tried both those methods, and this is the one that actually worked out really well. It also protects those tips, so I'm not going to be breaking them, and it worked out pretty well. They just always didn't hold as well because you need a little more force. The big tails were a lot easier. These were very, very solid, and I could go to town on it. We're going to be cutting a rabbet around the bottom of the inside on all of the pieces, and then we're going to be cutting in a groove around the top of the inside of all the pieces. And it's really kind of confusing because the inside is actually the long side of the board. It's one of those things you got to wrap your brain around when you're working on these. But after doing a few of them, it clicks, and you're okay with that. Now let's go back over to the top and let's cut these to the exact shape. We want to spice these up and trim them down. So we're going to cut them roughly to what we need, and then we're going to smooth them back until they fit into the groove. Again, I told you that these were about 3/8 of an inch thick. Well, my groove is 1/4 inch, so we're going to have to trim that down. But before we glue it all together and put them in, we need to make sure that the surface is clean, because I'm not going to be able to come back and scrape this because the box is a little higher on the edge. We're going to pillow the bottom of it so that it fits into that 1/4 inch groove, taking the very outside edge from 3/8 down to 1/4 inch. And that little bit of pillowing gives you a nice snug fit into the box. Now that we have all of the pieces made, with the exception of the bottom, we'll be doing that in a minute here, we need to do the dry assembling. See, these later dovetails were a really nice fit. Those just came together beautifully. About half the dovetails were gorgeous fit. 3 of them were okay, and 1 of them was just bad, the first one, of course. We're going to basically make it in 2 pieces. One half then can slide into the other half. We want to make sure we put the top in first, because once they go together, there's no way you're going to be able to get it in there. So with a bit of pounding, brute force, and violent manipulation, you can get this box to come together, working all the sides slowly but surely. Now for the actual clamp down of this, we're just going to use a strap around it, put a couple blocks to protect the corners from the strap itself. Want to make sure that everything works the way it should work, and then we can pull it apart to actually start the gluing on it. Now for the glue on this, because it was a bit gappy on a few of them, and also because this is going to take a while to put together, I decided to use Total Boat high performance epoxy. This has multiple benefits in this particular application. Number one, it's not going to be structural. I don't need the increased strength of the epoxy over regular wood glue, but I do need more open time. And even with Titebond 3 and some of the longer open times, I only have 30, 40 minutes. In this case, that might be very pushing this whole set to go together. With the epoxy, I've got 4 or 5 hours. Also, this is a very, very strong gap-filling glue. It is far, far superior to any of the PVAs or wood glues for gap filling. So anytime I know that I have a bunch of gaps in here, well, then this is a great application for it. I'm not going to actually glue in the bottom. I want that to be able to float and expand and contract. It's a little bit smaller than the open groove, so it has a little bit of flexibility to it, but not a whole lot. So there we can put this whole thing together, set it down, strap it down, and I really want to crank down the strap on this. I want to make it as small as possible before we put the bottom into it. The reason for that is I haven't actually fit the bottom to it yet. Now that it's all clamped together and I know its final size, now I can adjust the bottom to fit it exactly. I'm going to start on one corner and mark it with a 1 and a 1, and I'm going to make sure that edge is on, and I'm going to work on the 2 edges adjacent to that. And then I'm going to work on the 2 edges adjacent to that until I work it back around the board. And there you can fit, I had about half of it fitting down into it. And I've got all but that last, I think I had 2 sides at this point that I need to work down. And we're just going to slowly do it. Once one side fits in, don't touch it again. And you can come back and forth and back and forth. And this one's getting really close, and I could probably pound it down in. But the sides were still a little bit loose because I had the open time on the epoxy. We kept going until, hey, look at that. It pops down in there. So that makes it very, very happy. The glue inside is still having a little bit of flexibility. It hasn't fully set up yet. That's one of the great things of having the large open time from the epoxy. Then I can come in and lay it all in and pound all these down in there. And really, really happy at this point. Everything's getting excited. We're going to let it sit and cure and then come back over. Now it's time to make the dovetails a little bit prettier. Whenever you can smooth them off, it's much better. In this case, we're going to be planing from one side to the other, but if you blow out the other side, you have the grain going at 45 degrees away. It's just going to tear apart on you. So you have to plane from one side to the middle and then from the other side to the middle. And on these small faces, that's actually pretty difficult. With a little bit of a shearing cut, you can get into it. But yeah, don't plane all the way through it. You don't want it to blow out on the other side. So plane from one side, then plane from the other side. Oh, look, there's a little bit of Paduke on the side. I wonder what that was. Now, I was originally intending on hiding all of the grooves that extended out either by plugging them or by putting a band on it. But I decided on the bottom ones to put a band on it, the top ones to just leave them. I kind of like the look of them. I know, I'm a little weird. So we're going to put a marking gauge on and mark down and then across the top. And then we're going to cut a rabbet by cutting down and across the top, or again, across the bottom. This will allow me to cut little straps of Paduke to then fit into these grooves. And if you've ever tried cutting a rabbet with a saw, give it a try. It's actually rather surprising how useful it is. I could have cut it with a rabbet plane, but because the grain had that 45-degree section, it was really causing me a lot of problem. So I'm going to mark out where I want this scrap to go. Again, I'm going to mark it with a pencil because I want to stay away from the line. I want to make these much fatter than they need to be. And we're going to cut them down to a little longer than they need to be. And on one end, we're going to shave it down to a 45 degrees. So that means putting it in the shooting board with a 45 degree on there and just putting a 45 degree point on one end of it. The reason for that is it will tuck into the previous one. So each one has one end that tucks in and one end that sticks out long. I'm going to mix up some 5-minute epoxy in this because it don't really need any structural strength to it. And the 5-minute allows me to do it and then come back to it a little bit later and work on it. And you can see how then one stick goes on and then the next one will come in and the 45-degree angle will tuck in behind it. And we can continue that around. But through the magic of a cooking show technology, we already did half of it. I can come in with a little bit extra epoxy and spread it in. Now, I could hold these on with tape, but I wanted to make sure that they were held in very, very well, giving the epoxy a chance to work into all the corners. So I found using a couple clamps to put it in actually worked out a little bit better. Then allowed me to drive them down in and make them fit tight into the edge. And whenever a clamp sticks, that is a reminder that maybe I should put some paste wax on that before the next glue up. Then we can come in, cut them off close to flush, and then plane them down to exactly flush. And it's going to be the exact same steps we had before with cleaning up the dovetails, except for this time I had to be more careful because the Paduke had very obvious grain direction. So I had to be very, very careful about smoothing it down. I got it close to the surface, and then I came in with a file and really did the detail smoothing to get them right down to the surface. The nice thing about a file or a card scraper is you can go against the grain a little bit more with that. Ooh, now it's time to mark where we're going to cut the top off because now this is a sealed box. So we're going to come in 3/4 inch. That'll put the groove right in the middle of the top and get ready to cut that off. Before I do that, I need to actually plane the bottom smooth and flat because I need to be able to clamp this together, and the bottom had some epoxy glue out on it. So we're going to be going with the grain, but then also going around the box. It's kind of an interesting one to plane down smooth. So we can put it up in the vise and start cutting in with a tenon saw right on that line all the way around, one side at a time until we make our way all the way around and the saw pops through and it's like, yay, we cut through, very exciting, and then realize, oh, no, we didn't cut all the way through, so we got to do a little more. But after that last side, now it comes through and we have a box with its lid. Going to clean off all of the tape inside and then we can plane the surfaces down. We want to plane those two sawn faces nice and smooth. And then it's time to add a little hinge. And I had these really cheap steel hinges. They're nothing special, but they'll work great for this. And I just need one hinge on this because the hinge isn't going to be what's holding it together. The hinge just keeps the lid with the box when I take the hinge off. So we can mark it out and then cut it out. I could have used a router plane on there, but for something small like that, it's simpler just to take the chisel bevel down and cut into it. And then we need a way to keep the lid closed, and I also want to mount this box on a metal box, on a metal crate, or my cupboard. So that means magnets. Yes. So I have a depth stop with a bit that is just the right size, and this will allow me to cut in a hole that the magnet can then fit into. I want to make sure that fits down in there, and it's nice and flush. It goes down in, and I'm very, very happy with that. Unfortunately, this one was very tight, and I couldn't get it back out. So that when I added a little bit of epoxy to the surface, and it kind of worked down around it. Initially, I started by putting 4 magnets in the bottom of this. Found out that wasn't quite strong enough to hold it to the cupboard. Ended up with 9 total on the bottom. And then I also want to put 3 into the lid to keep it closed. So the hinge will hinge on one side and then have 3 magnets around the edges. The problem is I need those holes to be exactly the same spot on both the lid and the bottom. So I'm going to use a marking gauge to come in around and then put a little nick mark right in the lip. And then I can draw that nick mark up around the lid and the box, and I can make sure that they intersect at the exact same place. Put in a dimple so that we know exactly where the drill needs to go, and with a center bit that will cut the bottom flush, we can come in and drill out the holes for the magnet to go in. Then with that depth stop on there, everything works out perfectly. They get these really nice holes that the magnets fit into exactly. They sink down to the right amount, and good to go. For the glue on it, I'm going to mix up a little bit of 5-minute epoxy and then put a drop or 2 of that in every hole, or as close to a drop as I can because it's rather thick, and then put the magnets in. Now the problem is if I put the magnet into the top and I put the magnet into the bottom, then I have to make sure that they are both the right orientation vertically so that they're not repelling, but then they're also rotated correctly to give the strongest pull. So the easiest way is to put some tape on it, put the magnets onto the top, and then fit it into the box. Apply a little epoxy to the box and fit those down in. And that way I know when the magnet goes into the hole, it is exactly matched up to the magnet on the other side. And that way they will all draw together and give you the strongest bond between them. So we can set that aside, let the glue dry up, and then we can do the finishing touches. We're almost done with this. I'm going to put a big chamfer on the lid, basically taking it down to the groove depth. And so that's about a 1/4 inch chamfer around there. And I have to be careful on this because some places you're going against the grain. And then we're going to sand the whole thing. I know this is really going to scare a lot of people, but that will help the oil absorb deeper. So, what am I going to do with this? Oh yeah, homemade boiled linseed oil. The big benefit with the deeper oil penetration is that you see a greater contrast between the open pores and the closed lignum. And so especially with this quarter sawn white oak, I want to see all that contrast. If you're working with something like pine or maple where you don't want to see that blotchy contrast, then you don't want to have it soaking down in deeper. But for this, because I want to see all that oak contrast, I need to sand it first. Just with a 400 grit, it clogs the pores with dust, and that actually will suck the oil down in and wick it down in farther. Now that we've applied paste wax and boiled linseed oil, we can finally put in the screws to attach the hinge, and it's basically done. I think all we need to do is load this up. And a lot of people are wondering, what do you put in a first aid box in a hand tool shop? What do we need in here? First off, on the bottom, big gauze, smaller gauze, big Band-Aids, alcohol and antibiotic wipes, and of course lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of little Band-Aids for all those tiny little nicks. Then some tape, and of course tongue depressors. And it goes right there. So whenever I need it, take it, use it. Quick and easy access. Some look good, and some really don't. So, there you have it. A really cool little box full of safety things to help stop the bleeding when I slice the side of my finger with the side of my chisel. Now there you have it. I have done angled dovetails in the past, but never all the way out to 45 degrees. So this one was a bit of a challenge, and as I went along, each dovetail got sequentially better, and by the last couple, they're actually really nice. Whereas you could tell the first ones I did were really not. And so I played with a bunch of different things in this. I like the idea of the band in the bottom to hide that groove, but then also leaving the top open to say, yeah, I kind of like the look of the holes on it. It's different, it's odd, and I kind of like that, especially with the magnets, because I can very quickly and easily just attach that to metal things and it disappears. So as with a lot of my projects, this one was kind of an experiment, a way to have a little bit of fun and try something out, and I really, really like it. I actually, this is coming out a lot better than I expected it to be, especially halfway through when I started getting into some of those dovetails and think, wow, I'm going to have to remake this thing. I really like how this came out. So I hope you like it. I would love to hear your thoughts onto it. What things could I do better? Now, technically, the best thing I could have done was to make a preamble of this and try it out of something cheaper and get used to making all of the angled dovetails before jumping into this and learning by trial. But I actually like to learn that way. I like to jump in at the deep end and make mistakes mistakes, and oh well, I learn about it, and every time I look at this, I will think about everything I went through to learn to make this. And I absolutely love how this came out, and I'm looking forward to hopefully never using it. But until then, it's going to have a place in my shop. So I hope you like that. Let me know your thoughts, ideas, comments down below. And I do want to say a huge thank you to all of the patrons on Patreon. Those are all the people scrolling over here on the side. They are the ones who are quite literally keeping this channel going. Without patrons, this channel wouldn't exist. So thank you. Honestly, without patrons or members who click the little join button, we wouldn't be around here today. We are run completely by you, the viewer, not sponsored by other companies out there. So I get to say what I want to say and have some fun doing stupid little things that are just enjoyable. That's what this whole channel is about, doing things that are fun. So I hope you like that. If you do, think about becoming a patron or a member. You can find out information on that in the description down below. So I think I'll do it for now. And until next time, have a wonderful day. I had to really resist from not putting a big stop on the other side.